Welcome to Dreamy Night Facts, the gentle learning channel. I'm so glad you're here tonight. The Silk Road, sleepy stories of ancient caravans. This quiet place, a place where learning slows down, where history unfolds gently, and where curiosity can soften into rest. Here, you don't need to stay awake. You don't need to remember everything. You don't need to follow every detail. You can simply listen, or drift, or fall asleep whenever your body is ready. Tonight, we journey along one of the oldest pathways ever traced by human footsteps. Not a single road, but a weaving of roads, stretching across deserts, mountains, and forgotten cities. A path made not of stone, but of movement, of stories, of time itself. This is the Silk Road. If you enjoy this peaceful approach to learning, and you'd like more quiet journeys like this, you're always welcome to subscribe to Dreamy Night Facts, so a new restful exploration is waiting whenever you need it. Before we begin, take a slow breath in and let it go gently. Allow your shoulders to soften. Let your jaw unclench. Let the day loosen its hold on you. There is nowhere you need to go now. Nothing you need to solve. Nothing waiting for you on the other side of this moment. Only quiet. Only night. Only the gentle unfolding of a journey that once connected the edges of the world. Entering the ancient world, long before maps were drawn, before borders were named, before the world felt small and reachable, the Silk Road was simply a path, then another, then many. It was never a single road. It was a living network, a web of tracks stretching across deserts, mountain passes, river valleys, and grasslands that seemed to run endlessly beneath the sky. Long before caravans crossed Asia, people were already moving, following rivers, following seasons, following survival. Footsteps pressed into dust and vanished. There were only distances, vast, unmeasured distances, between mountains and oceans, between languages and beliefs, between people who would never meet. And yet, even then, something in us wanted to move, to carry stories, to carry objects, to carry meaning across the unknown. And slowly, over centuries, those movements began to weave together, thread by thread, step by step, until one day, without anyone ever naming it, a road existed. Imagine a vast open landscape at dusk, the air cooling, the sky deepening far away, a faint line of figures moving slowly across the horizon. Not hurried, not lost, just moving, always moving. The Silk Road begins here, not as a destination, but as motion. the beginning of movement deep in ancient China. Long before Rome rose, before Persia expanded, before Europe knew the shape of the East, a quiet discovery was made. Silk, soft as water, light as air, stronger than it seemed possible. For a long time, there was no Silk Road, no name, no single direction, no great design, only people moving slowly across the world for reasons that felt small at the time. A trader carrying fabric to a neighboring valley, a herder following seasonal pastures, a messenger traveling between distant courts. No one knew that these quiet movements would one day form a pathway across continents. The Silk Road was never built in a moment. It emerged gradually, like a trail worn into the earth by countless footsteps. Not planned, not mapped, simply repeated again and again and again, until movement itself became structure. The deserts came next. Endless oceans of sand. Places where wind erased all memory of yesterday. To cross them required patience and trust. Caravans formed not from ambition, but necessity. Merchants walked beside camels for months at a time, step after step, day after day, night after night beneath stars so bright they felt close enough to touch. The desert was not empty. It was quiet. And in that quiet, the Silk Road learned how to breathe. The Eastern beginning, one of the earliest threads of this great network, began in ancient China, thousands of years ago, long before Rome, long before most of Europe had written records. Chinese civilizations were already forming along the Yellow River. These early societies were shaped by cycles of flooding and renewal, harvest and hardship, rise and collapse. Dynasties came and went. Cities were built, abandoned, and built again. But across all that change, something remarkable endured. A deep understanding of craft, of materials, of patience. And among the many things these early cultures created, one stood apart. Something so delicate, so luminous, so difficult to make, that it would eventually reshape the world. Silk. The secret of silk. Silk did not begin as a global commodity. It began quietly, almost accidentally, in the stillness of ancient gardens. According to Chinese legend, silk was discovered when a cocoon fell into a cup of hot tea and began to unravel into a long, shimmering thread. Whether true or not, the story carries a kind of softness, a sense of discovery that feels almost peaceful. What matters is this: by at least 3,000 years ago, Chinese artisans had learned how to harvest silk from silkworm cocoons, and more importantly, how to weave it. The process was slow. Silkworms had to be carefully raised. Mulberry leaves gathered daily. Cocoons collected at just the right moment. Then, each cocoon unwound, thread by fragile thread. A single garment could require thousands. It was labor measured not in hours, but in devotion. And the result was unlike anything else in the ancient world. Silk shimmered in the light, soft as breath, cool against the skin. It did not feel like cloth. It felt almost alive. Imagine holding a piece of silk in your hands. It barely weighs anything. It moves like water. It catches the light softly, like moonlight on a still lake. Something so small, carried so far, and slowly it began to travel. Silk as power. In early China, silk was not merely beautiful. It was powerful. It became a symbol of status, reserved for royalty, nobility, and ceremony. Silk robes marked authority. Silk banners marked victory. Silk wrappings honored the dead. It was worn by emperors, given as tribute, stored as treasure. In some dynasties, silk was even used as currency. A bolt of fabric could hold the value of gold. because silk carried more than texture. It carried meaning. It represented refinement, control, civilization itself. And for centuries, China guarded its secret fiercely. The knowledge of silk making was protected with extraordinary care. To reveal it was treason, punishable by death. For nearly 2,000 years, the world could admire silk, but no one outside China knew how it was made. The first westward movements, and yet, even the most carefully guarded treasures begin to move. Not suddenly, not dramatically, but slowly, almost invisibly, through human curiosity. At first, silk traveled only short distances, from one kingdom to another, from inland courts to frontier settlements. Then, further still, carried by traders moving beyond imperial borders into lands less controlled, less predictable. Silk crossed mountains, moved through narrow passes where the air grew thin and winds carried the cold breath of distant peaks. It followed river valleys, winding through forests and grasslands where horses grazed beneath endless sky. Each exchange carried it farther, not as a grand expedition, but as a series of small decisions. A trade here, a gift there, quietly. Picture a caravan resting under a vast sky. The sand still warm from the sun. Camels kneeling in the dark. Small lanterns glowing softly. Above you, the Milky Way stretching endlessly across the night. No cities, no sound, only wind moving slowly across dunes, and time becoming very, very wide, where worlds begin to touch. As silk traveled farther west, it began to move beyond landscapes and into civilizations, not just across mountains and deserts, but across languages, beliefs, and ways of life. The Silk Road was no longer just a route of distance. It was becoming a meeting place. The Persian Bridge between China and the distant Mediterranean. Between East and West, Persia stood like a bridge, a vast region shaped by powerful empires. The Persian world. For centuries, Persian kingdoms rose and fell across the lands we now call Iran, Iraq, and Central Asia. Empires like the Achaemenids, the Parthians, and later the Sasanians, each different, each changing with time, yet all sharing something important. They existed in the middle, and because they stood between worlds, they became bridges, not just of territory, but of exchange. Persia was not a single road. It was a network of cities, gardens, fortresses, and caravan stations. Royal highways stretched across the land. Some built centuries before the Silk Road fully formed. Messengers once carried imperial orders along these routes, moving faster than most people believed possible. These same roads would later carry silk and spices and stories and ideas. They built roads not just for armies, but for ideas. Persian cities became resting points in a moving world. Gardens in dry lands, libraries in dust-filled winds, languages meeting without conflict. Persia did not simply pass goods along. It translated them. Ideas changed as they moved. Religions blended. Stories shifted. And slowly, the Silk Road became something more than trade. It became memory in motion. Persian traders became some of the most skilled intermediaries on the Silk Road. They understood languages, customs, diplomacy. They knew how to negotiate between cultures that did not understand each other. A Chinese merchant might never see Rome. A Roman buyer might never meet a Chinese weaver. But somewhere in between, a Persian trader would handle the exchange. Silk passing through careful hands, repriced, rewrapped, renamed, becoming more mysterious with every 1,000 miles. Culture in motion. But what moved across Persia was not only silk, it was music, mathematics, astronomy, poetry, written under oil lamps. Medicinal knowledge gathered from mountains and deserts. Religions traveled too. Zoroastrian fire temples glowed across the region. Their sacred flames tended in quiet devotion. Later, Buddhist monks passed through these same lands, carrying scrolls wrapped in cloth. And centuries afterward, Islam would spread along many of these same routes, reshaping the spiritual landscape once more. The Silk Road did not carry a single culture. It carried layers, each one settling gently over the last, like fine dust in desert wind. Rome hears a rumor. In Rome, silk arrived like a whisper, a fabric no one could explain. It shimmered. It flowed. It seemed almost alive. Roman elites became obsessed. Silk was worn like liquid light, so valuable that some feared it weakened the empire. Gold flowed eastward, and Rome paid gladly, without ever fully understanding where silk truly came from. Rome, civilization built on roads, armies, and ambition. The Romans were builders, organizers, collectors of the world's wonders. And when they heard whispers of something extraordinary, a fabric so smooth, so luminous, that it seemed almost unreal. Silk. At first, silk arrived in Rome in small quantities, a curiosity, a rarity, seen in markets, displayed in courts, touched carefully, with disbelief. No one knew how it was made. Some believed it grew on trees. Others thought it was combed from mythical creatures. The truth lay thousands of miles away, beyond deserts, beyond mountains, beyond imagination. And that mystery only deepened its allure. Silk and status. In Rome, silk became more than a luxury. It became a symbol. To wear silk was to declare wealth, influence, power. Emperors draped themselves in it. Elites demanded it. Roman writers complained about it endlessly. Some called it decadent. Others called it dangerous. There were even debates in the Senate about banning silk altogether. Not because it was ugly, but because it was too beautiful, too soft, too revealing, too foreign. Yet no law could stop desire. Silk continued to arrive, carried across continents by unseen hands, and Rome paid dearly for it. Gold flowed eastward in staggering amounts, so much that some Romans worried that silk was draining the empire's wealth. A fabric reshaping economies. The long middle between Rome and China lay the true heart of the Silk Road. Not empires, not endpoints, but the long middle. Vast lands where caravans traveled for months, sometimes years, where survival depended on rhythm and patience. This was the realm of Central Asia, a world of deserts, steppe grasslands, and sky that felt impossibly wide. And within this immense expanse, oases became everything. Cities in the sand, in the middle of these dry landscapes. Water meant life, and wherever water gathered, cities grew. Some of the most legendary cities of the Silk Road were born this way, not beside oceans, not along great rivers, but around small, stubborn sources of water that refused to disappear. Places like Samarkand, Bukhara, and Merv, names that once shimmered across the ancient world, places where traders rested, scholars debated, stories gathered like wind-blown leaves. Here, the Silk Road slowed, not to stop, but to breathe. Imagine a night market lit by oil lamps, spices warming the air, distant music drifting between narrow streets, languages you don't recognize, but somehow understand. Silk brushing against wool, laughter rising, then fading. A city alive in the dark, and outside its walls, endless sand again. Samarkand. Samarkand rose like a mirage along the Silk Road. A city of blue domes, sunlit courtyards, and tiled walls that caught the sky. Caravans arrived carrying silk, lapis lazuli, paper, horses. Languages mixed in its markets. Persian, Turkic dialects, Chinese, later Arabic. Merchants haggled beneath woven awnings. Water trickled through narrow channels. Dust settled softly on packed earth. For travelers who had crossed endless desert, Samarkand must have felt like a dream, a pause in the impossible. Bukhara, not far away. Bukhara became another jewel of the Silk Road, older in spirit, quieter in tone. A city of learning as much as trade. Mosques rose above winding streets. Libraries gathered knowledge from distant lands. Scholars debated beneath shaded courtyards. Here, ideas traveled as far as goods. Astronomy charts copied by hand. Medical texts translated across languages. Philosophies carried in memory. From teacher to student. Bukhara was not only a marketplace, it was a crossroads of minds. And then there was Merv, once one of the largest cities in the world, standing at the edge of the Karakum Desert, where survival itself felt unlikely. Yet Merv flourished. Caravans passed through its gates endlessly. Silk, spices, precious metals. Walls stretched wide around the city, protecting gardens and homes from the harshness beyond. At its height, Merv was said to rival the greatest cities of its time. A metropolis in the middle of nowhere, sustained by trade and movement. But like many Silk Road cities, its brilliance would not last forever. Some would fade, some would fall, some would vanish into sand, leaving only echoes. The Silk Road did not only carry goods, it carried belief. Buddhist monks walked from India into China, carrying scrolls wrapped in cloth. Christian communities formed quietly in distant lands. Islam spread along trade routes, not by force, but by familiarity. Faith traveled slowly, like caravans, like wind, like memory. The pulse of the Silk Road. These desert cities were not accidents. They were necessities. Without them, the Silk Road could not exist. Caravans needed rest. Animals needed water. People needed shelter. So the road shaped the cities, and the cities shaped the road, each oasis becoming a heartbeat in a vast, living system. A place where stories were exchanged beside fires at night, where travelers compared routes, shared warnings, told rumors of distant empires. News could take months, even years, to travel from one end of the Silk Road to the other. But slowly, the world began to feel smaller, connected by repetition, by memory, and by movement. And somewhere in all of this, silk continued to move, thread by thread, caravan by caravan, through Persia's gardens, through Rome's marble halls, through desert cities glowing under starlight. The Silk Road was no longer a fragile beginning. It was becoming something vast, a living network, stretching across continents, carried not by kings, but by countless ordinary journeys. And as centuries passed, it would carry even more than silk. It would carry belief, invention, plague, wonder, and the quiet realization that no civilization exists alone. The long road between worlds. If the great cities were the Silk Road's resting places, then the caravans were its heartbeat. Endless lines of movement, stretching across landscapes that seemed to have no edges. Between each oasis, there was only distance, and those who traveled it lived between certainty and uncertainty, between maps and sky. The shape of a caravan, a Silk Road caravan, was not a single group. It was a small, moving world. Dozens, sometimes hundreds of people. Merchants carrying goods wrapped in layered cloth. Guides who knew the land by memory rather than map. Guards hired to deter bandits. Animal handlers walking beside camels with quiet patience. And always the animals. Camels. Tall. Enduring. Unhurried. their padded feet pressing softly into sand. Step after steady step. These were not hurried journeys. A caravan moved slowly by necessity. 20 miles a day, sometimes less. The pace set by heat, by terrain, by the strength of the weakest animal. There was no rushing the Silk Road, only continuing. Each morning began early, before sunrise, before the desert could warm. Campfires glowed faintly in the dim blue light. Water skins were checked carefully. Bundles retied with practiced hands. Then slowly, the caravan would begin again. A long line, unfolding across the land. Day on the Silk Road. By midday, the heat could become relentless, especially in the great deserts of Central Asia. The Taklamakan, the Karakum, the vast basins where wind carved dunes into endless shifting shapes. Here, sunlight felt heavier. Not just warmth, but pressure. Air shimmering above the sand. Horizons blurring into mirage. Travel often paused during the hottest hours. Caravans would stop near whatever shade could be found. A rock outcrop, a sparse tree, a worn cloth stretched between poles. People rested in silence, saving strength. Even conversations slowed under the weight of heat. The desert had its own rhythm, and travelers learned to follow it. The threat of sandstorms, sometimes without warning. The wind would rise. At first just a whisper, then a steady push across the dunes, and then the sky would change. Light dimming, as if evening had come too early. Sandstorms were among the greatest dangers of the Silk Road. Walls of wind-driven dust, erasing distance, erasing direction. Caravans had learned how to respond. Animals were made to kneel. Loads secured tightly. Faces wrapped in cloth. People turned their backs to the storm and waited inside a sandstorm. Sound changed. Wind roaring like distant surf. grains of sand striking fabric and skin in endless motion. The world reduced to pressure and darkness. Time felt stretched there. Minutes becoming long, uncertain. But most storms passed. And when they did, the desert emerged again, reshaped. Familiar paths altered. Dunes shifted just enough to remind travelers that nothing here was permanent. Night travel in many regions. The real journey happened at night, when the heat faded and the desert released its grip. Caravans would move beneath open skies, guided not by roads, but by stars. Constellations became maps. Orion rising over distant ridges. The steady glow of the North Star. The pale river of the Milky Way stretching overhead. For those who traveled the Silk Road, the sky was not decoration. It was guidance, memory, direction, companion. At night, sound carried differently. Camel bells chimed softly in the dark. Footsteps muted against cooling sand. The occasional murmur of voices, low and tired. Some travelers walked in silence for hours, lost in thought or memory, or simply the rhythm of movement. The Silk Road could be lonely, but it was rarely empty. Imagine walking a narrow mountain path at dawn. Cold air, thin clouds below you, prayer flags moving gently in the wind, a bell ringing somewhere far away. No rush, no destination, only the path. Travelers of many kinds. Not everyone on the Silk Road was a merchant. Some traveled for belief. Pilgrims, monks, scholars, people carrying not goods, but ideas. They walked the same paths, shared the same wells, rested in the same caravanserais. But their purpose was different. Not profit, meaning. The spread of Buddhism, one of the most profound journeys along the Silk Road, was spiritual. Buddhism began in northern India, centuries before the Silk Road fully formed. But it was the Silk Road that carried it outward, northward, eastward, into Central Asia, and eventually China. Monks traveled with caravans for protection, their robes dusty from the road, their belongings few, scrolls wrapped carefully in cloth, prayer beads worn smooth by repetition. They moved slowly, teaching as they went. Along the way, Buddhism changed. As it crossed cultures, it absorbed languages, symbols, stories. Greek artistic styles influenced early Buddhist sculpture. Persian motifs appeared in temple designs. Local traditions blended with older teachings. The Silk Road did not simply spread religion. It reshaped it. Monasteries in the desert, across Central Asia. Monasteries appeared in unlikely places, carved into cliffs, hidden in valleys, built near caravan routes. These became resting places for travelers, sanctuaries of stillness in a world of motion. Inside, cool stone walls held quiet. Oil lamps flickered gently. Incense curled upward in thin, patient spirals. Monks copied manuscripts by hand, translated teachings into new languages. Knowledge moving slowly, one careful stroke at a time. Some of the most remarkable sights still remain. Cave temples filled with faded murals. Buddhas painted in soft mineral colors. Eyes closed in eternal calm. Art carried across deserts, preserved by dryness and time. Whispers of journeys long finished. A road of exchange. By now, the Silk Road was no longer a single story. It was many stories, interwoven. Merchants seeking wealth, monks seeking truth, travelers seeking something unnamed, each carrying their own reasons, yet all sharing the same dust, the same stars, the same long horizon. Ideas traveled as surely as silk. Paper moved westward from China, changing how knowledge was recorded. Glassware moved eastward, delicate and luminous. Mathematics, medicine, music, even foods crossed continents. Peaches moving west, grapes moving east, flavors reshaping cultures, quietly, over centuries. And now, for a moment, let yourself step onto that road, not as a merchant, not as a monk, just as a traveler. Imagine the desert at night, the air cool, soft against your skin. Above you, an endless sky, stars so bright they seem almost close enough to touch. The caravan moves slowly beside you. Camel bells, gentle, unhurried, a soft rhythm in the dark. No cities, no noise, no urgency, only movement, only breath, only time stretching quietly forward. Feel the stillness of that vast landscape. The sense that the world is wider than thought, older than worry. Each step pressing softly into sand, then fading behind you. Nothing to carry, nothing to chase, just the quiet certainty of continuing. And somewhere ahead, a faint glow, an oasis waiting in the distance. Not close, not far, just enough to guide you onward. And that is enough. The road expands. As centuries passed, the Silk Road continued to widen, routes branching, paths multiplying, some roads fading, others rising in importance. Empires would grow along it and fall along it. Cities would flourish, then vanish. But the movement never truly stopped, because the Silk Road was never just a road. It was a pattern, a habit of connection, a reminder that distance can be crossed, one journey at a time. When the roads became one world, there were centuries. When the Silk Road felt vast and uncertain, broken by borders, interrupted by war, dependent dependent on fragile alliances. And then, for a brief moment in history, something changed. The distances did not shrink, but the world became connected in a new way. The rise of the Mongols in the early 13th century. A new power emerged from the grasslands of Mongolia. Nomadic tribes, once divided, began to unite under a leader who would become known as Genghis Khan, a name that would echo across continents. The Mongols were not city builders. They were riders of open land, masters of movement, masters of endurance. They understood distance not as an obstacle, but as a landscape to cross. And as their empire expanded, it spread faster than any before it. From the Pacific shores of China, across Central Asia, into the Middle East, and deep into Eastern Europe. A single empire, stretching across most of the Silk Road. A road under one sky. For the first time in history, much of Eurasia fell under unified rule. Not identical cultures, not identical languages, but one overarching authority. And with that unity came something unexpected. Stability. Historians would later call this period the Pax Mongolica, the Mongol peace. Not because the world was gentle, but because long-distance travel became possible in ways it never had before. Caravans could move farther, with fewer interruptions. Messengers could cross thousands of kilometers, carrying orders, letters, and news. Traders could travel under the protection of imperial passes, small metal tablets granted by Mongol rulers that acted like passports, a sign that the bearer was under imperial protection. Roads were not paved, but they were protected. Way stations appeared across the empire, relay posts where horses could be changed, food and shelter provided, an early network of communication stretching across continents. The Silk Road at its peak. During this time, the Silk Road reached its greatest intensity. Not just trade, exchange, movement on a scale never seen before. Caravans grew larger, journeys grew longer, ideas traveled faster than ever. Goods flowed in steady streams. Silk still moved westward. Spices still traveled across deserts. Precious metals, fine ceramics, textiles, medicinal herbs. But now, more traveled with them. Scholars crossed empires. Diplomats journeyed between courts. Artisans carried techniques from one world to another. Papermaking spread further west. Gunpowder knowledge traveled beyond China. Printing ideas began to move slowly outward. The Silk Road was no longer just a trade route. It was a transmission line of civilization. Cities at full bloom. Cities along the Silk Road flourished. Samarkand, Bukhara, Kashgar, Merv, places that had always mattered, now glowed with new intensity. Markets filled with unfamiliar languages. Caravans arriving daily. Scholars debating in shaded courtyards. Architecture blended styles. Persian arches. Chinese roofs. Central Asian patterns woven together. A visible fusion of worlds. In these cities, it was possible to see the Silk Road made real. A Chinese merchant bargaining beside an Arab trader. A Persian astronomer speaking with a Mongol noble. A European traveler listening quietly in wonder. Different worlds, meeting in shared space. The story of Marco Polo. And during this era, one traveler's story would endure more than most. Marco Polo, a merchant from Venice. Young when he first traveled east, accompanying his father and uncle, crossing deserts, climbing mountains, entering the court of Kublai Khan, grandson of Genghis Khan, ruler of the Eastern Mongol Empire. Marco Polo would later describe cities filled with paper money, coal fires burning like black stone, roads longer than imagination. Whether every detail was exact, historians still debate. But that almost doesn't matter. Because Marco Polo's account captured something deeper. the sense that the world was larger than Europe had ever imagined, that beyond familiar horizons lay entire civilizations, complex and ancient. His stories traveled westward, copied by hand, read aloud, retold across generations, inspiring curiosity, inspiring disbelief, inspiring journeys yet to come. A connected world under Mongol rule. The Silk Road briefly became something extraordinary. A continuous thread, not without danger, not without hardship, but connected. You could begin a journey in the Mediterranean and travel in stages all the way to the Pacific. Not easily, but possible. And that possibility changed how people understood the world. Maps slowly widened, not just in geography, but in imagination. The idea that continents were linked, that knowledge could travel, that cultures were not isolated islands. The Silk Road reshaped how humanity understood distance, the fragility beneath the peace, but stability built on vast empires is rarely permanent. Even at its height, the Silk Road carried seeds of change. The Mongol Empire, though powerful, was enormous. And enormous things are difficult to hold together. Over time, unity began to fracture. Different regions pulled in different directions. Local rulers gained independence. Internal conflicts emerged. The single empire slowly divided into smaller khanates. And with fragmentation came uncertainty again. Routes that had once been safe became unpredictable. Protection weakened. Borders hardened. The Silk Road did not vanish, but it became more fragile, more complicated, more like it had always been. Even now, the Silk Road has not vanished. It lingers in cities, in recipes, in music, in words that traveled too far to return. It remains in silk that still moves like water, in spices still warming the air, in stories that crossed deserts and never stopped traveling. The road was never just a road. It was connection, movement, memory. And tonight, you've walked a little of it too. Invisible travelers, and alongside goods and ideas, something else traveled the Silk Road. Something unseen. Disease. In the 14th century, a devastating pandemic began to spread across Eurasia, carried unknowingly along trade routes, by caravans, by ships, by movement itself. The Black Death. It moved from Central Asia into the Middle East, into Europe. Entire cities changed forever. Populations fell. Trade slowed. Fear spread where curiosity once lived. The same roots that had connected the world now carried loss. A reminder that connection has shadows. The sea begins to call as centuries passed. Another shift began quietly. Not in deserts, not in caravanserais, but along coastlines. Sailors, kingdoms, explorers began to look outward toward the sea. Sea routes had always existed, but now they began to expand. Ships grew stronger. Navigation improved. Ambitions widened. The ocean, once a boundary, became a pathway. Maritime trade offered something the Silk Road could not. Speed. A single voyage could carry vast cargo without crossing deserts, without months of caravan travel. Ports began to replace oasis cities. Harbors replaced caravan hubs. The center of gravity slowly shifted. The quiet decline. The Silk Road did not end in a single moment. There was no final caravan. No last merchant closing a gate. Instead, it faded. Gradually, like footsteps disappearing into sand. Some routes remained active for centuries. Local trade continued. Pilgrims still traveled. But the great intercontinental artery began to quiet. Desert cities shrank. Caravanserais emptied. Wind moved through abandoned courtyards where languages once overlapped. And yet, the Silk Road was never truly gone, because what it created could not disappear. It had already done its work. It had already woven continents together. The legacy that remains today. We remember the Silk Road as a road. But it was never just that. It was a network of encounters, a long conversation across centuries between merchants and monks, between empires and villages, between strangers who met and exchanged something before moving on. It changed food, language, art, faith, science. It expanded maps and minds. It taught humanity. Slowly, the distance does not prevent connection. Only time delays it. And if you listen closely, in the quiet spaces of history, you can still feel it. Not as a road of stone or sand, but as a memory, a path worn into the story of the world, still stretching between cultures, still echoing in the way ideas travel today. You don't need to hold the images now. You don't need to remember the road. Everything can drift gently away, like sand carried softly by wind, like lanterns dimming one by one in the distance. If thoughts are still present, they can grow quiet. If sleep is already near, there is no need to return. The road continues, even without you. Caravans moving slowly beneath stars. Footsteps fading into dunes. Your breathing steady, slow, soft, natural. The world grows quiet now. And somewhere far away, the Silk Road continues, endlessly, gently, under the night. And now, as our journey quiets, you don't need to carry any of it with you. You don't need to remember the cities or the deserts or the names. You can let them dissolve gently, like footprints smoothing over in the sand. Feel the calm of your body settling, shoulders soft, jaw loose, breath moving in and out like a slow tide. If thoughts appear, they can pass like clouds. No need to chase them. No need to solve anything. Somewhere, far beyond this room, the old road still stretches, silent under starlight. A thread of movement across the night. But you don't have to walk it now. You can rest, as if you've arrived at a warm, quiet shelter. Lanterns low, wind outside, and deep peace within. Just breathing, low, soft, safe. And when you're ready, sleep can take over, gently, completely. Good night, and thank you for traveling with me.